Hey, so I didn't really want to get back onto the topic of asexuality, which I used to talk about heaps ages ago. Look at me in my little therapy chair. Um, yeah, I don't really want to talk about it because so much has happened, and I've sort of gone through this cycle of confusion and then coming right back around to the start. But I've managed to get myself a little bit worked up today and kind of annoyed and angry and pissed off and whatever. So I thought I'd just complain about a few things. Um, Now some of you will be going, haven't you had boyfriends? How can you call yourself an asexual? Um, so first thing, when I call myself an asexual, I don't know for sure, they're just labels, aren't they? But for simplicity's sake, rather than umming and ahhing about all the finer details, asexual is just a nice little thing that I can just put out there and be like, there you go. You know, it's minimal explanation. Whereas, these days, the asexual community in particular has gone and splintered sexuality itself into all these tiny little categories that get smaller and smaller and increasingly more useless as they get so divided. Because at some point, the terminology is so specific that only people who are deep into the whole community that uses it will understand. If you told my parents, they wouldn't even know what demisexual is. And that's like just one split. And then you get on to all these other weird things that I can't even remember anymore. I was reading about them one day and just going, I don't even know. So, there's a point where the terminology gets useless. And I'm also too lazy to say, well, I'm asexual, but I did have these relationships. Because at that time in my life, I was confused and being manipulated. And I realize now I was being gaslit into giving up some of myself. But I was also incredibly insecure. Like, I'm not going to go through the whole story of my life every time someone says, so what's your sexuality? Which no one ever says, really. They just assume that you're either straight, gay, bi, or whatever. But yeah, so it's just easy for me to say asexual. But the other thing is, just because I've had boyfriends doesn't mean that the label is any less relevant. People who are gay have been in full-on relationships, gotten married, had kids, and then gone, you know what, I'm gay. Which is going to be a fun thing for you to edit if you want to troll my friends, but yeah. I'm gay! You could just take that bit and go and try and tell people that I'm gay, because there are already people who think that because of my band Rainbow Death Ray, which at the time that I came up with the name, I didn't realise the association between rainbows and LGBT, so people ended up thinking we were a bit of a lesbian band, and I'm like, no, that had nothing to do with it. But anyway, yeah, no, people can go their whole lives thinking they're one thing and then suddenly be like, wait a minute. And then all the pieces fall into place and they realize actually they're gay. Or in my case, hey, maybe I was always asexual and I just got really confused. Because of some of the things that I rambled about before. I'm not really going to go into my relationships because, yeah, so much stuff happened and yeah, it's a big jumble and it's not really any of your business to know exactly what happened and how I ended actually I did end all those relationships. I was really hoping someone would dump me at some point because that would have been so much easier if they just it's not working. I'd be like, okay! That would have been easier than having to go in and take their hearts and rip them into tiny pieces. Because as bitchy as I like to appear occasionally, I don't actually like doing that sort of thing. Anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, so just because I've had relationships doesn't change who I am. And also, if I hadn't had those relationships, and this is what happened before, like ages and ages ago before I had any relationships and I was talking about being asexual, you'd get people saying, well, if you haven't tried it, how would you know? And I'm like, and this is one of the things that has pissed me off recently is last year I was talking to some dude and the topic of relationships somehow came up and he was basically saying, oh, you just haven't had enough relationships, you've got to date more people before you can decide that, it's not for you. And I'm like, well, fuck off. Because you wouldn't tell a lesbian that they just need to date more men. You wouldn't tell a gay man that he just needs to date more women. If someone is who they are, you don't go around saying, oh, well, you haven't tried enough to know. Which was annoying, because I think that's part of the reason I've gone on this big circle, is because people are like, well, how do you know? You've never had that experience. And I'm like, well, that's true. I guess I should try. And I have tried dating people, and I have decided it is not for me. So I just come full circle to what I already thought about myself in the first place. And that's really annoying. Yeah, and then also some people can just change, but I don't have any examples of that. I have me originally thinking I was asexual, getting confused, having a dude get into my head and, you know, mess with me, and feeling insecure and wondering, like, maybe it is just a lack of experience and all that kind of crap. And I went through all of that only to come back to my original conclusion. Of course, I'm still open to the idea that maybe one day I'll change my mind again and realize, actually, I was such and such all along. But right now where I am, this is who I am, and I have never been keen on watching sex scenes in movies. I have never been keen on even just watching kissing scenes in movies. A lot of the time I just have to look away because I'm like, that's awkward. Yes, I have kissed people, but that doesn't mean I like watching other people do it. You know, it just... And sometimes, like, I remember kissing people and I'm like, why did I ever do that? Yeah, so I've come in this big circle, but what's gotten me worked up, right? It is, I recently asked for some book recommendations on my Facebook page, and I specifically said I didn't want any books that had a whole lot of relationshipy crap in it, thinking that my friends would actually read that and realize that I don't want relationshipy crap. Because I just find those stories boring. There are occasionally, you know, things in fiction where the sex thing makes some sense to the story, but it's incredibly rare. Yeah, so it's just, I want other story. I don't want love story, that's really boring. Unless, like, so what, the romantic comedies I've watched, there's that one where the guy, he has some accident and then suddenly he's seeing dead people, and there's a romance woven into that, but the whole thing about him talking to dead people is hilarious. And then there was another one where the guy moves into a new apartment, I think, and he starts seeing this dead woman, and there's a whole lot of funny stuff that happens. And so usually those kinds of things, it's the funny stuff that happens that I'm into and not the love story. So yeah, but I asked for recommendations on my Facebook page and people gave me some. And I made the mistake of listening to one and buying the book Wicked. I have not seen Wicked the musical, but I was curious enough because, you know, the Wizard of Oz story, and she's the Wicked Witch of the West, and supposedly there's a more complex thing going on under that. And if you remember my whole destroyer thing and the duality obsession, which I'm still kind of into but not in the same way, I was like, ooh, here's a classic good and evil kind of conflict. That sounds like a book I would be into. But no, it turns out that the book is pretty much just sex and terrible relationships, and there's hardly any story. Like, they go to school, a goat gets murdered, she gets angry and runs away, and the rest of it is just all this relationshipy filler about how they don't get along, and then there's all this crappy sex stuff, and I'm just like... So I've gotten halfway through this book, and I'm just like, I can't read any more of this shit. Because I've started having dreams about telling people off about their crappy acts of sex that they're doing in front of me without my consent. Probably one of the reasons that people get confused about my sexuality is because I did hang out with the BDSM guys for a while, but because I was fascinated by the violent side and then the power play side, not because I was into the sex side of things. And yeah, people would show you stuff without asking you if you were okay first. And I'm like, why would you do that? This whole culture is about consent, and you're just showing me your... So yeah, I had a dream last night that involved people doing really weird stuff, and I was like, no, that's not good. And, you know, just shouting at people. Yeah, and so I'm just really pissed off that I was told to read this book when I specifically said I don't want relationshipy crap in it. And what makes this even worse is that this person who recommended me the book had very recently invited me to a polyamory event, thinking that I was polyamorous. I don't know. See, I guess people are just that confused about me, but yeah, and so I actually told this person, hey, I'm not that. I'm actually ace, so just don't send me this stuff. You know, it's cool that you didn't know, but just don't, I don't need that stuff. So they know that I'm like this, and they ignored that, and they ignored my request not to have relationshipy stuff, and they recommended me this book anyway. I don't think this person watches my YouTubes, but just in case, hi, you know, I'm sure you're a cool person and all, but you kind of need to think about this stuff more before you go and just assume that everyone is that happy about sex. Yeah, so I've just gotten myself worked up, and that's why I thought about that dude who was telling me that I just haven't had enough relationships. You know, it only takes a small thing to get me going, and then I'm like, oh yeah, and that person, and this person, and whatever. And, you know, I really didn't want to have to talk about this stuff again, because there are heaps of other people talking about asexuality these days. I think when I was doing it about 10 years ago, it wasn't as big a thing. You know, there was Avon, but it hadn't really gotten big, and I've always found Avon, like, it's weird. You go there and people are asexual, and quite a lot just aren't interested, but a lot of people end up talking about sex anyway, and that's the sort of weird paradox about those groups. But today, it feels like it's kind of gotten worse with the asexual community. I don't like the asexual community, I'm sorry, it's not for me. And not just because you end up talking about sex more than you'd like. I joined a Facebook group about asexuality, and I followed the page and the connected group for a while, and I actually learned heaps of stuff. I mean, that's how I sort of came to peace. Like, instead of being confused about what I am, I'm just like, you know what, asexual, that label is fine for me. It covers all the basics. You know, if anyone wants to know anything more about my life, it's not really their business. And then, yeah, learning about what other people's experiences are like, because there's so many different kinds. I mean, there are people who are asexual who still enjoy sex, or they will have sex just because they love their partner that much that they would do that even if they're not that keen. And, you know, just the whole bunch of things. And that's, of course, we start seeing the splinters of sexuality that just don't, that they stop being helpful pretty quickly, because, you know, most people don't speak like that. But I suppose when you're in the bubble of that community, you end up picking up the jargon and forget that other people don't understand you. I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of groups come into conflict, because people just don't understand each other's language and don't realize that they've come up with a different, like, we're all speaking English, but you mean different things. And I can rant about that another day if I feel like it. I'd rather not, though, because it gets a bit political and I don't want to have to deal with all the people going, yeah, but... Yeah, anyway. So the problem with that community is at some point, they were trying way too hard to be all-inclusive. And it's a bit like the all lives matter kind of thing. Or instead of feminism, I'm about equality. And those things where you remove the group that you're fighting for from the name of it and whatever, or like from the focus. Because if you remove the group that you're trying to support from that focus, you end up not helping them. So if you don't talk about, you know, women's rights, and you just say everyone's rights, then when women are being treated badly, you don't really do much about it. Like, it's harder to actually see it unless you say this is a women problem. Or when it comes to people of color, if you don't say, like, people like, if you don't specifically say, okay, Aboriginals have a higher rate of incarceration and higher death rates and blah, 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 blah. If you don't specifically say that, how can you ever fix the problem? If you just say, oh, we should have less people in jail or whatever. I don't know if I'm saying it clearly enough, but so this asexual group, by focusing on everyone, I started to feel like it was losing the asexual thing, and they would go on arguments about all kinds of other gender and sexuality stuff that wasn't actually that relevant to asexuality, and people would get into these vicious fights. And at some point in the group, there was this massive disagreement between a trans person and a person with PTSD, and they were both accusing each other of different things, like, oh, you're not using my pronouns, and oh, you're not using content warnings, and just it got really big and nasty. And in the end, the group got I think the admins came in and turned off the group temporarily, and when it finally came back, they had this huge list of rules, and I'm just like, if people want to talk about something that they're genuinely concerned about, you having too many rules, you're kind of stifling that discussion that needs to happen on certain things. And yeah, I don't know, it's tricky because you don't want to upset people too much, but on the other hand, like, if I don't want to see something, I just hide it. It's as easy as that. If someone's annoying you, just block them. You don't have to listen to every horrible thing that people say. People are always going to say horrible things, at least on the internet, where they're hiding behind a screen. And, it's hard because you can't just stop people from being dickheads. You can put all these rules up that you want. They're still going to be dickheads, so you might as well just ignore them a lot of the time. Yeah, and then also on the main page, they started posting a whole lot of trans stuff, which, like, there's nothing wrong with, but the problem was when those posts were starting to get really nasty towards people who didn't understand, because not everyone naturally knows these things. You're talking from your bubble, and you're judging people who haven't even discovered a lot of this stuff yet. And instead of getting angry at someone for not understanding you, you should be like, you should talk like adults and be like, hey, that upsets me. It'd be nice if you could just stop. Here's why it upsets me. And if they just blah, blah, blah at you, there's only so much you can do. But if you get angry back at them, and, use curse words and whatever, and say that they're less than human simply for disagreeing with you, this is where I'm going to get people saying, oh, you're tone policing. Just don't get me started on some of these things. We need to just all be nice to each other. Yes, if you're in a minority, it sucks, but that doesn't give you a free license to be horrible to one another. And the page wasn't necessarily the worst part, because sometimes, the memey type things that they'd post would be a bit misguided, but not necessarily horrible. But once you get into the comments, it was just awful. And yeah, I think it comes back to people expecting everyone to understand what they're on about all the time. It's like, I hate to use the trans example again, but you've got the trans versus the radical feminists, and trans people want you to use their pronouns. They want you to call them by the names that they've chosen and all that kind of stuff, okay? And if you've got gender dysphoria, which is like a proper mental condition, there's only so much you can do to treat it before transitioning is, the best option for you. That's my understanding. I'm probably simplifying it because I'm not part of the community. I don't know the terminology and all that kind of stuff. So please don't get mad at me for misunderstanding something. Okay, thanks. But what bothers me is when certain more extreme people in the trans community start saying that radical feminists are TERFs. And radical feminists have said, I don't want to be called that. And so you'd think that a community who already understands what it's like to be called by something that they don't want to be called would understand why they don't want to be called something that they don't want to identify with. But then, you know, it doesn't help to say, oh, but you did that to me, so I'm going to do it back. That doesn't solve anything. And I mean, the TERF term, like, I'm not a fan of some of the things radical feminists are into. I think they have a really big communication problem because they'll say things that are really easy to misunderstand. I sort of got roped into one of those groups for a while, and then I was like, oh, this is not what I came here for. But yeah, the people who are using the term TERFs 100% do not understand what the radical feminists are about. And I think on the radical feminist side, they seem to either be simplifying the trans experience too much, or they just don't understand certain things. And it's just like, can we just all stop and listen to each other and try to understand each other's language and try to use language that the other people can understand? I don't know. I've rambled for a while, and, you know, I don't like talking about gender and sexuality because people get so damn sensitive about it, so you can't really express an opinion or ask a question. But yeah, I don't know. And because of the way that asexuality gets treated a lot, I mean, I didn't realize for a long time that the LGBT and so on community could be so dismissive of asexual experiences, because there actually are a surprising number who either say you haven't had enough relationships yet, or you haven't met the right people. But there are also people who are like, oh, you don't experience any discrimination ever. And I'm like, oh, why would you say those things when you don't even know? You know, if it's not your experience, how do you know? The problem is we live in a society where sexuality is everywhere. You know, sex sells. It's everywhere. But if you're not asexual, I don't think you see it quite as much. It's so much easier to ignore. So yeah, I don't know. And some of this stuff, it's frustrating. I mean, I don't like the asexual community because of how it's been hijacked over and over by trying to be too inclusive instead of, you know, being a community. I mean, yes, there are people from all different kinds of whatever. You can mix asexuality up with so many things, but that got frustrating. And then, of course, they're always talking about sex. I mean, I'm talking about asexuality right now. How many times have I said the word sex? Do you see what a problem it is to try and talk about this stuff without talking about the thing that you don't want to talk about? So yeah, I'm not really into the community. And on the other side, the LGBT community, I don't feel like I can really trust them to recognize that this is a thing. This is me. Leave me alone. Just let me be who I am. Stop trying to change me. So yeah, I prefer to kind of just sit it out, be myself. You know, everyone else can do what they like. Just don't bring me into it. And don't make me go on the, what is it now, 23-minute rant about all this crap that I've been holding back for ages. Yeah, so, you know, and I didn't realize this stuff back with Rainbow Death Ray. You know, it didn't click the association between rainbows and the LGBT movement, and it also didn't click for me that the LGBT movement wasn't that asexual friendly. There are people who get it, but there's still a lot who are just like, what's your problem? And all that. So yeah, since that's all clicked, I don't really get involved in LGBT type stuff. I don't get involved in Pride. I actually haven't even been to an LGBT gig or anything for a long time. I sort of just avoid all those events. I've had people invite me to protest because I don't know how many of you know, but Australia only just legalized same-sex marriage, and there was this whole hoo-ha. It was such a pointless thing that the government did, making us all vote. But hey, it finally got done and we moved on. Yeah, but someone invited me to a protest to make, like, you know, while that was all going on, and I was just like, I don't want to be involved. I just don't feel part of this community. Like, yes, I think you should have rights, but this isn't the place for me. You know, I will support you by expressing things online, like, you know, I occasionally shared things on Facebook related to the movement, but I'm not coming out and mingling with the same people who are going to hypocritically say you don't exist. What bothers me is that these are the same people who should know better. They should know what it's like to have your sexuality invalidated, but they're still treating me like this. I can understand, you know, your standard conservative heterosexual person who hasn't been exposed to enough of these ideas and is maybe incredibly entrenched in their ways, because everything is a shock to them. But when it's people who should know better, that frustrates me more, if I'm being honest. I think society should change all over, but if you're going to be kind of hypocritical, it starts to bother me. I know that sometimes I'm probably hypocritical because we're all human and, you know, it takes us time to grow and understand ourselves and whatever. But yeah, when people are claiming to be all open, that's what really bothers me. You know, I'm more than happy to recognize that I've made mistakes. I have made a lot of mistakes. I reckon I'm still making plenty of mistakes. But yeah, there are some people who are just like, if you're not with us, you're against us. You know, if you don't immediately accept our position, you're less than human. Blah, 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 blah. I just want us to all get along. God, the world is such a mess. Shit, and I forgot to record this on a lower setting, so it's gonna take ages to upload. Damn, maybe I can make it smaller in... Actually, no, did that work last time? Or if I edit this in Windows Movie Maker, maybe it'll get smaller, because Windows Movie Maker does WMV files, and it's only 25 frames a second, so let's try that. Yeah, right. Bye for now. Oh, what's my... If you like it, give it a like. If you're new here, subscribe. I haven't made up the rest of the song about sharing and the notification bell and commenting. Do I want people to comment on this video? I don't know. In the past, when I talked about asexuality, I got a lot of horrible comments. And I also got people sending me private messages about really disgusting things. So if anyone is gonna, you know, hurl abuse at me or say disgusting things, I'm just gonna delete and block you straight away. Because, hey, you can have your free speech, just not in my space. I don't have to listen to you. You can yell into the void whatever you want. I don't have to entertain you, okay? Yeah. I'm grumpy. Can you see my shirt? Yeah, let's go for some hyperbole with a little punk teddy. You can see him on Instagram as well. I got some knives out. I'm gonna go before I hurt myself. This is now half an hour and I did not mean to make the video this long. Bye. Yeah, you know what? I will say one thing about my relationships. I think I've kind of realized that it's not for me, partly because I just don't have the interest in people that people had in me. And I think I kind of knew it all along because, you know, the things that I was getting out of a relationship aren't the same things that other people seem to get out of it, but also occasionally my partners would be like, you don't really care about my hobbies or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, I kind of don't. You know, maybe it's just that I'm heaps narcissistic or whatever, but for some reason the guys that I dated could get really into a lot of the things that I was doing, but I wasn't able to return that sort of affection. So, you know, I've had someone today, you know, I had a little bit of a mini rant on Facebook, and someone said to me, like, you know, if you're aromantic as well, that's fine. And, you know, I think maybe I am. So it's not just the asexuality thing. I think I'm just not into any of that kind of connection. I'm much happier hanging out with my dog, who is asleep and probably going like, why are you bugging me? And yeah, these days I also have a much better relationship with my parents, so I'm not as starved for, you know, I mean, I think we all get a little bit lonely sometimes, even though I have this sort of image of, you know, just being about myself. And I know a long time ago I was lonely. That was probably the main reason that I was into things like robotics, because I thought I'd build myself a friend, and Pokemon and Digimon and so on, because you had your own little friend. They don't talk shit to you and get all crazy like us people do. And then these days, I mean, I've had dogs for ages, but my relationship with Hope is much better than it has been with any other dog. And even Marley, I get on really well. Ali and Max, I mean, I did get on well with them, but that was mainly towards the end, I think, once I got out of school. When I was at school, I was busy all the time, I was out all the time, so they were more likely to go hang with mum until I was actually home a lot. Whereas these guys have been used to me being home a lot because, my life sort of fell apart and I haven't quite picked it up back together again yet. But yeah, so a lot about my life has changed and I've also grown, and I think I'm more, I just feel better about being who I am. And I think I've also ditched this idea that I have to have some kind of solid identity because I'm just always changing. So it's kind of hard to say, oh, I'm definitely this. And, I'm exposed to different sides of society. So it's really hard for me to come up with opinions sometimes. And even when I do have opinions and go on and on and on about them, sometimes I worry about going on about them because I know something else might happen and I might change my mind. I'm in this weird position where my family and my old high school and, all that side of things is more of that sort of right-wing conservative kind of group, whereas because I'm in music and art, my social circles tend to be very left-wing and more liberal. Liberal in the American sense, not in the Liberal Party Australian sense. Those are completely different things. So I end up seeing both sides of stories a lot, and while I think I'm probably left-leaning, it's hard to say though because, I'm confused. I mean, my dad thinks I'm heaps left, just because I disagree with certain things that he thinks, whereas left-wing people have occasionally thought I was very right-wing. So I don't really know where I am, but you sort of get the idea that I don't know. Where was I going with this? I don't even remember. I started off talking about, just not being interested enough in people. Oh, and then I was talking about being more okay with myself. And then I was talking about identity. Yeah. Oh, God. This is why I end up going on and on and on forever. Because my brain is like, and another thing! Oh, is there a dog? Let's go and woof at the dog in the neighbor's fence. Oh, my God. Hypey. Hypey. Stop woofing at the other dog, babe. Come on. Oh, I know. Is it lonely, eh? Hup. Come on. What do you think, Marley? What do you think? They're noisy, aren't they? Hypey, you coming? Oh yeah, and one more thing. Hope's back. He was woofing at the other dog. No, one more thing is, I think in my case that the whole experience I had of going full circle was kind of inevitable, because, I did have so many insecurities, but also because I grew up before asexuality was a bigger thing. I mean, it's still a really small thing that a lot of people don't think about and are really annoying about when you try and explain it to them. But at least now that there's more information about it, I mean, like, everyone has the internet now, whereas we didn't get it reliably until I was in high school, I think. So I think, I hope that kids these days who think they're asexual or are sort of searching in that direction don't feel the pressure that I felt, and the insecurity that I had. But I think because of the time that I've grown up and a lot of situations around me, it was kind of inevitable for me to go through the whole process that I did. And I have to say that I don't entirely regret it, because if I hadn't gone through those really kind of awful experiences at times, not always terrible. I mean, there's some things that were okay, but overall I have a negative impression of what I went through. But if I hadn't gone through all that, I don't think I would have figured myself out the way that I am now. I might have been wondering about it forever, I think I am one of those kinds of people who has to, overthink things, and sort of, convince myself enough that this is who I am. I mean, like, one of the things I'm not going to try is illegal drugs. So it's not about trying everything, but there are some things in my life that I feel like I had to try to realize that it wasn't for me. With the illegal drugs thing, right, I was thinking a while ago that if I got so depressed that I was considering suicide, it would be better off to at least try weed first. But now that I've been through such a hectic medication thing with all the side effects that I've had, I've sort of realized, like, weed itself has its own side effects. I'm clearly a sensitive person on that sort of thing. It's probably not going to help, and I'd rather not go through that. But it also helps that I'm not depressed anymore. So yeah, I don't need to try drugs, but I probably did need to at least have some kind of relationship experience. It's just a shame that it was the person that I picked to start things off. And then, after that, it took me a while to sort of realize that I didn't need relationships. So I made a few more mistakes. But overall, I think I've come out of it, more secure about myself. So yeah, I don't entirely regret what happened to me, but it was a shit thing that kind of happened in my life. But I'm a real weirdo, and my life has been a bit of a mess, so, whatever. Hopefully I'll get better at stuff. Now that I always think, now I know who I am, but then in a few more years I'm like, I had no idea who I was. So I guess we'll see who I am in a couple more years and where my life goes from there. But yeah. Anyway, here's Hopi cleaning himself. I hope this is the last thought I have about it, because it's probably going to be like a 40-minute video if I'm not careful. Oh my god! Hey Hopi. Have you been rolling in something? I can see that dirty mark on you, huh? I can see those dirty marks on you. Yes. Yes. Hey? Oh, sweetie. Hi. You're a cutie, you are. You are, yes. Oh, you. Stop it, Mom, I'm trying to sleep. Hey, how do you like these, cushion covers? I think my brother actually sewed them up. Yeah. These ones are probably bought somewhere. But these two, my brother did, I reckon. Hey, are you enjoying his pillows? Yeah, are you? In your little nest here? Good boy. Alright, I'm gonna shut up now.